When people ask how it started with Daniel, I say, at a party. It sounds normal, fun. I don't say, it was the party where I was covering for my coworker, playing bartender for 3 hours while my feet ached, and he was the only one who noticed. He leaned over the makeshift bar and said, "You have the patience of a saint and the posture of a queen under siege." He didn't ask for a drink. He asked for my name, and then he asked if I got a break. It felt like being seen. After a year of dating apps and lukewarm conversations that fizzled, Daniel's attention was a spotlight. He was a freelance architectural photographer, creative, observant, intense. Our first dates were cinematic, picnics with cheese he'd sourced from a specific farm, walks where he'd point out the play of light on brickwork. He spoke in paragraphs about beauty and meaning. I, a copy editor who lived in a world of grammatical rules and corrected commas, felt like I was being led into a more vivid artistic world. The first red flag was so small it seemed like a romantic quirk. He was late to our third date, not fashionably late, 45 minutes late. I'd been sitting at the wine bar, checking my phone, my anxiety ticking upward. He arrived in a whirlwind of apology, holding a single perfect peony. "Forgive me, the light was just impossible to walk away from. I was capturing the sunset on the old foundry and lost all sense of time." He looked so genuinely anguished, so passionate about his art, that my irritation melted. He wasn't thoughtless, he was enraptured. I felt petty for caring about punctuality when he was out there chasing beauty. The pattern began. He'd forget to call when he said he would. He'd cancel weekend plans last minute because a magical job opportunity came up. Each time the explanation was wrapped in such poetic sincerity, such appreciation for my understanding, that it felt churlish to be upset. The bar for what was acceptable began to lower. Being stood up wasn't disrespect, it was the price of dating a free spirit. His occasional sharp tone when I asked about his week wasn't hostility, he was just in his head about a project. The first time I cried because of him, it was over something so stupid. We'd planned a cozy night in. I'd cooked. He texted at 7 p.m. "Client dinner ran late. Can't make it. Rain check?" I stared at the pot of now cold carbonara. I called him. He didn't answer. I sent a text. "I'm just disappointed. I was looking forward to it." His reply was immediate. "Wow, I'm out here hustling to build a future and you're guilt-tripping me over pasta? The pressure is real, you know." The whiplash took my breath away. I was the problem. I was the needy one, stifling his hustle. I spent the night apologizing, assuring him I supported his career. He forgave me magnanimously. "It's okay, my love. You just need to understand my world." The bar lowered again. My reasonable disappointment was reframed as a character flaw, my neediness, my lack of support. It was never one big thing. It was the death by 1,000 paper cuts. The way he'd critique my outfit. "That color washes you out, but you're still cute." The way he'd dismiss my job. "It's sweet you have your little word puzzles." The way my stories were often interrupted by his more interesting anecdote. I'd feel a tiny prick of hurt, then immediately dismiss it. He's just being honest. He's just passionate. He doesn't mean it like that. He never yelled. He never called me a name. He never hit me. There was no single documentable bad enough event. There was just the slow, imperceptible erosion of my sense of self, like tide smoothing a rock. I was so busy looking for the hurricane that I didn't notice I was already drowning in the drizzle. The erosion moved inward, from my social life to my private thoughts. Daniel had an opinion on everything, and his opinions were delivered as incontrovertible truths wrapped in the velvet of concern. "You know, your friend Chloe, she has such chaotic energy. I feel like she drains you," he'd muse after a group dinner. A month later, when I mentioned making plans with Chloe, he'd sigh, "If you think that's what you need, I just worry she brings out your anxious side." Slowly, without drama, I saw Chloe less. She wasn't forbidden. It just became easier not to invite the subtle disappointment that hung in the air afterward. It was the same with my family. "Your mom is lovely, but she does infantilize you, doesn't she? All those questions about your health. It's like she doesn't think you can take care of yourself." What had felt like maternal care now felt smothering. I started editing what I told my mother, shortening our calls to avoid giving him ammunition for his later analysis. My world, which had once felt spacious, began to shrink to the dimensions of his approval. I started preemptively editing myself. Would Daniel think this podcast was intellectually shallow? Would he find this movie too mainstream? I stopped suggesting restaurants because his critique of the ambiance or the ethics of their sourcing, "Do you know their carbon footprint, love?" would leach the joy from the meal. The arguments, never loud, always dense, followed a formula. I would express a hurt. He would express disappointment that I'd misunderstood him. He would explain, at length, my feelings to me. Me, timidly, "When you didn't text me back all day, I got worried." Him, sadly, "That's your anxiety talking, not me. You're creating a narrative of neglect. My silence isn't about you. I was simply present in my creative flow. You're asking me to shrink my process to manage your insecurity." I'd be left baffled, my original feeling now pathologized. Was I just too anxious, too needy? The problem was always my reaction, never his action. The goalposts of reasonable kept moving. I was in a game where I didn't know the rules, and he was the sole referee. The few times I gathered the courage to point out a pattern, his chronic lateness, his dismissive comments, he'd perform a stunning, soul-bearing capitulation. He'd take my hands, his eyes shining with tears. "You're right, I'm a mess. I'm so consumed by my art I forget the most important piece of art is us. I don't deserve you." It was a love bomb of such intensity that it would erase the previous weeks of neglect. I'd end up comforting him, assuring him he was worthy. The relief of being seen and right was so powerful it made me forget what I'd been fighting for. I became a detective of my own worthiness, scanning for evidence that I was the problem. I read articles about attachment styles. I started therapy, tentatively describing a communication issue in my relationship. My therapist asked gentle questions that made me squirm. How does it feel when he critiques your friends? What happens to your own interests? I found myself defending him to her. He's just very perceptive. He pushes me to be better. I was eroding my own shoreline from the inside, digging away the sand to match the contour of his criticism, believing it was self-improvement. I looked at other couples who fought about money or infidelity and thought, at least we don't have that. We had no screaming matches, no shattered dishes. Our damage was silent, like carbon monoxide, invisible, odorless, and deadly. I was putting myself to sleep in the garage of his approval, slowly, and congratulating myself on how peaceful it felt. The greatest trick the slow erosion plays is making you forget what water tastes like. You get so used to the dryness that a single drop feels like a monsoon. After months of his busyness and last-minute cancellations, a weekend where Daniel was fully present, phone down, asking me questions, planning a hike, felt like a religious experience. I'd bask in it, hoard the memory, use it as proof that the real Daniel was this attentive, loving man. The preceding 3 weeks of emotional absence were just a difficult patch, the necessary fog before this brilliant sunrise. My joy became disproportionately tied to his fleeting moments of generosity. He'd bring me a coffee after a particularly brutal discussion about my sensitivity, and my heart would swell with gratitude. He'd compliment my intellect after a period of dismissing my ideas, and I'd feel validated for days. These weren't normal acts of kindness in a healthy relationship. They were life rafts I clung to in a sea of vague dissatisfaction. My own achievements, which once gave me quiet pride, now felt hollow without his endorsement. I got a promotion at work, senior copy editor. When I told him, he kissed my forehead. "That's my girl, a steady little job. It's good you have something safe." The word little deflated the entire victory. Later, when he won a small photography award, we celebrated with champagne. The imbalance was never stated, it was absorbed. The isolation was now physical. My friends had stopped calling. Not in a dramatic way. They'd just gotten used to my nose, my distracted presence when I did show up. I saw the concern in Chloe's eyes once, but when she asked if everything was okay, I gave her a bright, practiced smile. "Everything's great. Daniel's just swamped, so I'm a bit tired." I was protecting him. More accurately, I was protecting the fragile narrative I'd built, that I was in a challenging but ultimately rewarding relationship with a complex, artistic man. One night we were at a dinner party with his colleagues. I was making polite conversation with a graphic designer when Daniel, across the table, loudly interjected, "Oh, Maya wouldn't know about that. She lives in the land of Oxford commas and corporate style guides." The table laughed politely. My face burned. It was a joke, but it was a joke that made me small, that positioned my world as pedestrian compared to theirs. The graphic designer gave me a sympathetic glance that felt like a dagger. On the drive home, I was quiet. "You're upset," he stated. "I just felt a little belittled at dinner." He sighed, the long-suffering sigh I knew so well. "There you go again, taking everything so personally. It was a joke, Maya. You need to learn to laugh at yourself. Your fragility is exhausting." That word, exhausting, it became the ultimate indictment. My feelings were not valid. They were a drain on his resources. I spent the rest of the ride apologizing for being exhausting, promising to be lighter, easier, less fragile. That night, lying awake beside his sleeping form, I had a clear, terrifying thought. I am so lonely. It wasn't the loneliness of being single, it was the profound loneliness of being with someone who made you feel alone. The person who was supposed to be my sanctuary had become the source of the storm, and he had convinced me I was the one who couldn't handle the weather. I was a plant he'd slowly moved from the sun to the shade, and I was so busy twisting my stems to reach for the slivers of light he occasionally allowed that I didn't realize I was wilting. I was normalizing the thirst. I had forgotten that relationships shouldn't feel like a perpetual negotiation for the bare minimum of respect. The bar was now so low it was a tripping hazard in hell, and I was still trying to limbo under it. The crack appeared, as they often do, over something trivial. It was a Wednesday. I had a terrible head cold. I'd texted Daniel in the morning, feeling awful. "Can you maybe pick up some soup on your way over tonight?" His reply was quick. So sorry, my love, swamped with editing. Can you Instacart it? It wasn't the refusal, it was the sheer unconsidered normalcy of it. In the 6-hour silence that followed, as I lay on my couch feeling pathetic and feverish, something shifted. The narrative I'd constructed of the passionate, busy artist who sometimes forgot the small things shattered. This wasn't a forgotten small thing. This was a fundamental lack of care, delivered with the ease of someone brushing off a fly. I didn't Instacart soup. I dragged myself to the kitchen and made tea. The simple action felt rebellious. He came over at 8 p.m., letting himself in with the key I'd given him. He was buzzing with energy, talking about a breakthrough he'd had on a project. He dropped his bag and headed for the kitchen. "I'm starving. What's for dinner?" I was still on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. "I'm sick, Daniel. I didn't make dinner." He paused, looking at me as if noticing me for the first time. "Right, the soup. Sorry." He opened my fridge, peered in, and sighed. "You have nothing. Want me to order us some Thai?" Us. He was hungry. My illness was an inconvenience to his evening. "No," I said, my voice raspy but clear. "I don't want Thai. I wanted soup, and I wanted you to care that I feel like death." The room went still. This wasn't my usual timid hurt. This was a flat, cold statement of fact. He closed the fridge and walked over, sitting on the edge of the coffee table. His expression was one of patient concern. "Maya, you're being emotional because you're sick. I said I was sorry. I'm here now. Let's just order something and relax." The old script was right there. He's here now. He's trying. You're being emotional. But the crack had widened. I saw the script for what it was. A script. A way to bypass my feelings and get the evening back on track for him. "No," I repeated. "I'm not being emotional. I'm stating a fact. I asked for one thing when I was sick, and you couldn't be bothered. That doesn't feel good." His face hardened, just slightly. The concern mask slipped. "I have a career, Maya. I can't drop everything to be your nurse every time you have the sniffles. You need to be more independent. This clinginess isn't attractive." Clinginess, the ultimate weapon, the final reframe. My need for basic decency was a character flaw, an unattractive burden. But for the first time, the word didn't pierce me. It landed on the surface of this new, cold clarity. I looked at him, this handsome, intense man I had loved, and I didn't see a misunderstood artist. I saw a man who had trained me to expect nothing so that he could be praised for the bare minimum. I saw the relentless, slow erosion of my expectations. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I just said, "I think you should go." He laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "You're kicking me out because I won't fetch you soup? Seriously?" "I'm asking you to leave because I'm sick, and you're making me feel worse. Please go." The shift in power was subtle, but seismic. I wasn't negotiating, I was stating a boundary. He stared at me, confusion and anger warring in his eyes. He was unprepared for this version of me, one who wasn't playing the game. He stood up, grabbed his bag. "Fine, get some rest. Call me when you've stopped being a child about this." After he left, the silence was different. It wasn't the lonely silence of neglect. It was the clean, sharp silence after a storm had passed. My head still throbbed, but my mind was clearer than it had been in a year. The crack in his lens was now a fracture in the entire frame through which I viewed our relationship. I saw the slow damage not as a series of misunderstandings, but as a deliberate, consistent pattern. The absence of a bad enough event was the whole point. It kept me off balance, always questioning myself. I had been looking for a bomb, when the real danger was the silent, invisible gas. I didn't call him the next day. For the first time, I sat with the discomfort of his absence without trying to fix it. I tasted the clean water of my own quiet company, and I realized how thirsty I had been. Daniel called after 3 days. His voice was smooth, conciliatory. "Hey you, have you recovered from your plague and your mood?" He was offering a return to normalcy, a chance to slot back into the old dynamic where I apologized for my mood. "I'm better, thanks," I said, my voice neutral. "Good. Listen, I've been thinking, we should get away. I've got a friend with a cabin in the Poconos this weekend. Just us, no distractions. We can reconnect." It was a classic love bomb, a romantic grand gesture to erase the preceding neglect. The old Maya would have leapt at it, seeing it as the proof of his love she'd been waiting for. The new Maya heard the transaction. "I'll give you a romantic weekend so we can skip over the part where I failed to bring you soup." "I can't this weekend," I said. A pause. "Why not?" "I have plans." It was true. I'd called Chloe. We were going to a movie. It was a small plan, but it was mine. Another longer pause. I could hear his brain recalibrating. The script was failing. "Maya, come on, this is important. We need this." "What we need," I said slowly, "is to talk, but not in a cabin in the woods, here in the light of day." We met at a neutral coffee shop. He looked tired. I felt calm. He started with his usual preemptive strike. "I know I've been distracted. This last year has been intense for me, but you have to know I love you. I just show it differently." I didn't take the bait. I didn't talk about love, I talked about actions. Over the past year, you have been consistently late, canceled plans last minute, criticized my friends and family, dismissed my career, and made me feel like my needs are an inconvenience. When I bring this up, you tell me I'm too sensitive, too needy, too fragile. He looked stunned. I'd never listed the charges before. I'd always dealt with them one by one, as isolated incidents. Laid out together, they formed an undeniable pattern of disregard. That's a terrible way to frame it, he sputtered. You're taking everything out of context. You're building a case against me. No, I said quietly. I'm just finally looking at the evidence. The conversation went in circles. He cycled through defense, justification, and finally, tearful apology. But the crack was too wide. I could see the mechanics of it now. The apology wasn't for my pain. It was a tool to regain control, to restore the comfortable dynamic where he was the forgivable, flawed artist, and I was the understanding saint. I don't think this is working, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and like a long exhale. He panicked then, real panic. So that's it? You're giving up over some soup and a few arguments, after all we've built? We didn't build anything, Daniel, I said, a profound sadness washing over me. You were busy building your career and your image. I was busy building a cage out of my own hope, trying to earn your kindness. That's not a relationship, that's an excavation, and I'm the one who ended up buried. I ended it. There was no single dramatic betrayal to point to. I simply handed back the narrative he'd written for me and walked out of the story. The aftermath wasn't fireworks. It was quiet, hard work. Reaching out to friends I'd neglected, often to awkward conversations and deserved wariness. Sitting with the yawning emptiness of my apartment without rushing to fill it with his noise. Relearning my own tastes, my own opinions, without running them through the filter of his approval. The slow erosion had done its damage. My confidence was shattered. I second-guessed my every decision. Was I being too sensitive? Too needy? The ghost of his voice lived in my head. But now I could recognize it as a ghost, an echo, not a truth. The healing came in tiny reclamations. Watching the TV show he deemed lowbrow, buying the garish throw pillow he would have hated, saying no to a colleague without a 3-paragraph justification. Each one felt like laying a single brick on a new foundation, one built on my own standards. I ignored the red flags because I was waiting for a cataclysm. I learned that the most damaging storms aren't the ones that rip off the roof in one go. They're the ones that trickle in, drop by drop, until you're sitting in a flood you no longer have the energy to escape. My betrayal wasn't an affair or a lie. It was the 1,000 tiny betrayals of my own spirit, committed every time I chose to accept less than I deserved in the name of love. And the hardest, most important lesson was this. The most dramatic betrayal of all had been my own, the betrayal of my trust in myself. Reclaiming that trust would be the longest and most vital journey of all.